Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to each and every one of you who are joining us today. And for those of you watching, this is a recording. We're excited to have you with us today for a session packed with valuable insights and transformative ideas. My name's Karen Wilson, and I'm an employee workflow specialist for ServiceNow. And we're delighted to have Toby Naylor from Dino Group with us today. Toby will share his journey transforming ServiceNow within Downer Group from a basic ticketing system to a powerful tool integrated with their HRS and other systems of record, which today is delivering immense value across the Downer Group. We also have Simeon, who's a solution architect with TMLabs, who supported Downer throughout their journey to share his expertise and insights. And here's what we have lined up for you today. Very shortly, we will get to the main event when I hand over to Toby and Simeon. And if I could ask you to please write your comments in the chat, we have Reneel from TMLabs ready and waiting to answer your questions. Now, the topic of today, the hybrid workforce continues to drive an increased focus on employee experience as employees continue to work from anywhere, whether that's on the front line, in an office, or on site, or even from home. They expect unified and consistent ways to help them find information and through the channel of their choice, be it mobile, desktop, Teams, or a mix of all of those things. And that includes completing compliance-driven tasks, such as undertaking training, maybe raising safety hazard cases for prompt action, through to the more human-specific tasks where it's not organization-driven, such as raising, parental leave, for example. In order to elevate the employee experience, we really need to be meeting employees where they are and wherever they are. However, there are a growing number of apps, sites, and tools that employees must navigate, and this can be a real challenge. Recently, I saw a study by Okta that states that the average large organization typically deploys around 105 systems, 75 systems and applications. And it's really these disconnected systems and legacy intranets that make it really difficult to create a seamless employee experience that needs to support our flexible workers from anywhere. And if we take an example that's familiar to all of us, imagine a new employee that's starting on their first day of work and everything that they need to be productive in their first day, and the number of people and departments that are involved in that process. Firstly, which device do they use? Some only have a mobile device, maybe they've not been allocated a desktop. Then they need to connect with HR to get the information and the material they need. Is that a phone, an email? Is it walking up to someone? And, we laugh, but yes, that still happens. And then the manager needs to approve the request. And again, by email, is that from a mobile phone? Is it a personal mobile phone? Is it a desktop? This can cause delays. And then we're over to the ID department to prepare an asset or access or really any IT related support. Then if the asset's not available, we call on our procurement friends who have to acquire the new asset. And the likelihood is this is tracked on a different system. And then you have to think about the other systems of record, of course. Have they been updated with the new starter information? Are they ready to pay the new employee, which is really important? It's super involved, leave, rostering that can impact how much the employee gets paid. And really that list goes on. And I'm sure this sounds familiar to a lot of you that are helping to make employees have the best experience possible as they enter into the organization. And of course, as they leave the organization as well. And on top of all of this, while we're not creating a really great employee experience, the digital sprawl makes, process governance and control very difficult. And wouldn't it be fantastic if we could kick off a digital workflow without relying on things like manual handoffs that waste time and lead to misunderstandings and, of course, confusion. The solution, and we do have one, is transitioning from today's experience that you can see on the left there to meet employee expectations, which, by the way, we're having conversations multiple times a day about how, to attract and retain Gen Z and our Gen Alphas is becoming even more challenging. But the solution is to enhance the employee experience by connecting systems and departments on a unified platform as part of a wider strategy. Of course, technology isn't the solution to everything. ServiceNow Employee Service Management enables employees to request, find, and search help across the entire organization, transforming your service portal into a digital headquarters by integrating your existing systems and applications. So from a single platform, your employees can access services, they can complete tasks, engage with personalized communication for them, and find all the necessary help, information, and content from any department across any function and through any channel, most importantly. Now, today's webinar is more about just sharing information, and of course we will aim to give you a lot of that, but it's really about equipping you with the tools and strategies to transform your organizational processes and elevate your employee experience. And we believe that with the right approach, as Toby will speak to you about over the next kind of 20 minutes or so, that you can achieve significant improvements in productivity and satisfaction within your teams. And this is a journey that Downer are on today. Now, let's kick things off with Toby from Downer. Toby, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. By way of quick introduction, I'm an HR guy. I'm definitely not a technologist. I, at some stage in my career, sort of turned into this particular person, and to even further, contextualize what's going on. I've said to many people across the ServiceNow community more recently that I haven't drunk the Kool-Aid. I'm not necessarily a ServiceNow zealot, but over the last 12 plus months, I think I've taken a few sips of the Kool-Aid now, and so I was very pleased to be invited to come and chat to you all. I want to talk about what it looks like to deliver a HR-centric instance of ServiceNow, specifically around employee experiences, and obviously that being usually the digital front door, if you like, or the services front door. So Simeon and I are going to chat to you all about sort of approaches that we've taken to get to the place that we're at. It should be noted right up front that we're pretty pleased with what we have at the moment. We've taken some pretty fundamental steps that feel maybe a little bit slow and foundational, but we feel confident that we've sort of built a foundation that we can build on now. But we're still kind of disappointed in ourselves. We still want to go further. We still want to sweat the asset that is ServiceNow even that much more. So I'll talk about that in that kind of context and how we went and what we did, etc. It's really important though to contextualize ServiceNow in the context of HRSD. So, like I said, I'm an HR dude and have been for many years, and I've come in as primarily an IT project manager. But I still need to have an HR lens over everything that we do, whether it be service related, UI related. Every single thing needs to be looked at through the lens of HR. So in context of service delivery, I'll start with a question. I know a couple of people on the call, and you sneaky people are welcome, even though I'll deal with you later. But there are absolute things that need to be top of mind when you're building an HR service delivery. So in terms of what HR should concern itself with, this is often an interesting question. I invite anybody to come off mute if they'd like to try and answer this question. But internally and externally, HR has to concern itself with many things. What's going on in the internal sort of ecosystem and externally as well. Can anybody hazard a guess potentially what they believe the most important thing HR should concern itself with internally? I'll count backwards from 5 in my head and I'll just answer it myself.
You can use the chat window to answer.
No, the ding's gone off. The most important thing is paying people. One of my previous colleagues is on the call and absolutely can attest to this. HR exists for many, many reasons. It exists to look after people. It exists to work out the right level of human resources, quite literally, that an organization needs to function, etc. When you break everything down, you've got to pay people, right? People aren't going to show up to work unless you do. They might, but they could also be, gluttons for punishment, who knows? But absolutely, HR at the end of the day is there to pay people, and a payroll function and a services function within payroll, it's vital that it works correctly. It's vital that HR concerns itself with paying people. Externally, I'm not going to count down. I'm just going to tell you, externally, the thing that HR should concern itself with most is staying out of the news. We could talk about macroeconomic effects. We could talk about socio-political effects. We could talk about many, many things, employment compliance, making sure that Fair Work are happy with it, all of that kind of stuff. But I need you to understand the context now of Downer. Downer is a big company, very, very visible. The things that we do and do well aren't reflected in the news. The things that we don't do well are. Now, there are many, many things that get you to the point of being in the news. And so it's kind of it's a tongue-in-cheek response, right? But basically what I'm saying by staying out of the news is worrying about getting everything done correctly. So paying people, when we don't pay people correctly, that stuff usually ends up in the news, especially if it's at scale. Let's go to the next slide, Simeon. The reason that I came along to Downer was to look at service delivery. So we've done that in a myriad of ways, which we'll get into in just a second. But ultimately, we had to start with the idea that modernization was key. Now, when you talk about modernization, that's relative to scale, right? And it's relative to the maturity level that you're at. If you are modernizing from paper being faxed to a fax machine across the state, your state of modernization might be very incremental, because taking the fax machine away can be quite an emotional experience for some people. But when you look at the reasons to modernize, it then gives you better perspective as to what you need to modernize. So of course, it needs to be cost effective. Of course, it has to have some service tiers in mind. In other words, we should be sending simple questions and simple queries and simple services to the place that is most equipped to deal with simple queries. Equally complex queries need to be handled in an HR context, potentially by a single business partner, somebody in industrial relations or employment law. And we need to make sure that ultimately people don't have to press too many buttons. They don't have to jump to too many hoops, through too many hoops, should I say, to get to the right person. We've got to be strategic, and mostly strategy around that is basically just scale, if I'm honest. We need to make sure that we have time to focus on strategy, but we only can do that if we have an idea of the scale that we need to build to. We're not going to build this huge shining beacon of awesomeness if our strategic approach is to build to that over, say, a 5-year period. Analytics and reporting, I imagine I don't need to expand on that too much. Data is key. Trying to understand what we do and how we do it is very, very important. But overall, it absolutely has to be about an experience. We need to make experiences better for people who show up looking for help. Now, this part of the context is really important. There will be people potentially on the call or even who see this later that potentially have worked in the ITSM module of ServiceNow. And I've worked with a bunch of those people. And the reason that I'm really happy to speak on behalf of TMLabs today is I have people working in this project who understand HR service delivery. They understand the HRSD module and what it means. When people contact us for services or for queries, sometimes it is quite transactional. Don't get me wrong. It's I didn't get paid or into the correct account. Something happened. It can be to do with a really simple kind of leave request, stuff like that. But what people also tend to contact us with are things like, I didn't get paid and my mortgage was supposed to come out yesterday and now my bank's screaming at me. I've got a significant tax issue. I've got an issue with superannuation. I believe I haven't been paid correctly over a number of years. Take that a level deeper. My boss is treating me unfairly. I've been harassed in the workplace, or I am experiencing domestic violence at home. Service delivery in an HR context is not ITSM. We're not delivering a ticketing system with an SLA. We have that as the fundamental core, but when people contact us, they're contacting us for very real scenarios. And the way that we build our service delivery is key to making sure that people can come to us in a way that they feel comfortable, in a way that we can then respond with fairness, transparency, and care. That sets the scene more than anything else I want to discuss with you right now. Let's go to the next slide, Simeon. So this is the ticketing process, okay? This is really, really simple. A query originates with ServiceNow. It goes to a service provider in-house. That can be a group HR function, people and culture function. We have a people services function here at Downer, and of course, IR. And we need to deliver those queries, A, to the right service provider, and B, to the right tier. We want to drive as much into tier 0 as we can, because that's all around self-service and automation. And we want the appropriate query to go to the appropriate tiered service and provider first time. We don't want to transfer tickets. We don't want to mess around. We just want it at the right place. Ultimately, it needs to land in a fulfiller group or a resolver group, depending on how you view the ServiceNow world, and ultimately it gets resolved. This in and of itself is actually a pretty simple map. Anybody can understand it, and 9 times out of 10, anybody could deliver it. But when you do things like overlay 35 or 33 to 35,000 people across a big spread of blue collar workers, a big spread of enterprise agreements, 100 plus enterprise agreements, and geographically displaced all over Australia and New Zealand, it starts to become a much more scary and interesting and complex prospect. When you then consider that a lot of these people are working on a site where they may not have access to a laptop, you need to think of things like mobile implementation. But it's very small in column B there at the bottom though. We want to make sure that all of these queries are mobile, that they can move across all of our HR disciplines and tiers. They have the case notes, they have the history intact, because that's actually what promotes consistency and fairness. Our HR service delivery process is mechanical, like any kind of ticketing process would be. But we see these as cases. We need to see these as cases that have a history. We need to go back to employee records and see how we've treated certain things in the past, and be able to, again, provide that consistency and fairness that ultimately, A, protects an organization and employees, but also keeps us out of the news. The only way to keep yourself out of the news is to do things fairly. Next slide. Our tiered services look like this. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but we have a tiered services model that is based on people being able to access us. So we have, from the bottom up on those bullet points on the left-hand side, we have converted all of our incoming email addresses to automatically raise a general inquiry ticket in ServiceNow. That means that we have analytics. That means that we have an understanding of the volume that comes in through email. It actually means that we can shut down a bunch of email addresses, I think 40 plus, since I joined the organization in April last year. You can book a video appointment and speak to somebody directly. It's a one-on-one private digital conversation, and people from a people services function or a people operations function are there ready to speak to you. You can call Get BSC. We've integrated an external third-party provider, a telephony provider, should I say. Again, that raises a ServiceNow ticket, so I have an idea about incoming call volume. We can map out these calls and transfer these calls to all of those service tiers that you can see on the right-hand side. But our biggest, our absolute number one point of entry is what we call the Downer portal, which in ServiceNow speak is an Employee Center. Let's go again, Simeon. So again, there are 4 contact channels you can see down the bottom on the left-hand side. What we've actually delivered, however, is 9 simplified services, a new portal, a virtual agent, and a pretty darn good FY25 plan. I'm not going to speak too much to that, but you'll see a little bit over the next couple of slides. One more time, Simeon. Shouldn't say one more time. It's going to be way more than that. We delivered a portal. we'll give you a view of the portal pretty soon because I want to show you the virtual agent as well. But what we delivered was a multi-department dynamic portal for service delivery and employee engagement. Now, at this point, it should be noted, even though I'm an HR guy and Simeon and a bunch of other people were working predominantly on the HRSD side of things, we delivered a portal for the entire organization, 35,000 odd people across IT services, people services, finance services, and procurement. It was pretty decent. With that came personalized content delivery. I'm not going to read all of the points on the slide that you can see here. We've got AI-driven search, which is kind of integrated with SharePoint. If anybody knows, you've got to have pretty darn good searchability in SharePoint before you really open up the pipes to ServiceNow, because the old analogy, rubbish in, rubbish out. So we've integrated some. I think at times we've turned it off just because it's maybe not centering on what we want it to do. But the AI search within the confines of ServiceNow itself is incredibly powerful and is working quite well. We've got chat, we've got live chat. You can speak to a IT agent live, and we're delivering a virtual agent or a UAT as we speak. We've really started using content analytics as a way to drive the way that we understand the portal to perform, whether that be clicks, whether that be views of knowledge articles, how people are, viewing their flow through the site. We can see user flows with pretty diagrams that tell us what people click into and where they go after that. That helps us optimize the way that we think about the journey that people use. And we've got a manager hub. Simeon's been working quite proactively with our group HR function, because even looking at analytics, we can understand that the Employee Center portal gets almost 20 times more clicks than the group HR SharePoint page. There's a simple reason for that. People go to our site. It's a services site and people go there. So we're working quite actively with migrating everything that's in SharePoint onto ServiceNow so that there's a leadership hub and manager hub that sits there as a useful tool for the organization, because we get eyeballs purely and simply, and it works like that. On the right-hand side, you can see a bunch of things that we want to do, from advanced case management to further integration with separate systems, especially payroll and HRISs. Advanced analytics and reporting. We absolutely are working on mobile, working hand in glove right now, in fact, with IT, to bring ServiceNow in the first instance to all of our people that have existing access to ServiceNow, and then going more broadly across our blue-collar workforce, which would be a game changer, especially when you think about being able to chat with a chatbot if you needed an answer right there on the site straight away. And hugely into security and employment compliance, especially around data monitoring, making sure that we have a really good plan moving forward for that. That's the portal. Next one.
Can I jump in here, Toby?
Sure.
Yeah, I think so I'm Simeon. I've had the pleasure of working with Toby and his team since last July, I believe, in helping set this up. And just wanted to share maybe just a few thoughts from the implementation point of view, and why we believe we were able to achieve a successful outcome in a short time frame. For this first phase for the portal, it was quite a tight time frame, and I think some lessons that we learned was that Toby did a great job in running his team, which was its purpose was to achieve more than just the ServiceNow aspect, but we were included in that team, and that really helped to achieve a really high level of collaboration. The team was just really responsive to changes, to feedback, answering questions, and so I think learning that it's really important just to have dedicated resources, that can drive this project along. That was really essential. The quick turnaround, I think we can also attribute to being able to leverage many of the out-of-the-box features of Employee Center, which really helps to accelerate just spinning up this new portal. And for those who are not familiar with Employee Center, this is a relatively new portal that ServiceNow rolled out. And its purpose, as stated earlier by Karen, is to be this one-stop shop for all across your business. I think historically within Downer, they did have a portal before, an Our Downer portal version 1, and from what I heard, it was known to be an IT portal. So now that's changing with version 2. It's going to be incorporating more than just IT, obviously. Yeah, so those are my thoughts, quick thoughts. So I'll hand it back, to Toby again. Thanks.
Yeah. Look, I think, to expand on what Simeon's saying, I mean, we were very lucky to have dedicated resources, including, seconded resources from the business that we grabbed, because contextual knowledge and operational knowledge, if you like, is fundamental. Your system has to speak the language of the business. We can't use terminology that's going to alienate people, etc. The other thing that I think is worth expanding on as well is we were given a lot of rope by IT to run the program the way that we wanted to. It's maybe slightly controversial in some project management disciplines and theories, but we documented as built after we delivered. We were given, I won't use the large A agile kind of terminology, because it wasn't an agile run program at all. It was sitting in a room looking at each other, thinking about UI, thinking about the way that services would appear on the screen, etc. But we delivered the portal from engaging TMLabs in July, 77 days afterwards, which I think would be fair to say, this isn't an indictment. I think it's fair to say that most companies, or most large companies of this size at least, would probably spend about 77 days writing business requirements. We had a history of being able to deliver before. We had delivered some good stuff. We'd gotten the trust of the platform manager here, who was a general manager level person in the IT team. So we were given these parameters, or this sort of freedom within a framework, after spending a lot of time engaging and spending a lot of time really setting the scene for what we were trying to do. Of course, we were delivering a platform on that person's behalf as well, so that didn't hurt either. But I've been saying to Karen and Simeon and Ronil as we've been planning the session, maybe one of the pieces of advice I can give more broadly when you're trying to deliver an HR-centric platform is to have the money in your pocket and buy people from IT a coffee. Not just to lull them into a false sense of security or make them think that you're a good guy, but to start understanding the way that they speak and the way that they operate, and how you can ingratiate yourself and how you can build trust, build a really good foundation to try and build some good things on. It's not too much to say that HR is sometimes a forgotten stepchild in the context of a big IT strategy. Fortunately, we tend to have a seat at the table, and I've got people who I work for that are quite good at that, but it's not always a given. I think it's absolutely, in terms of thinking about a portal, a services portal that lots of eyeballs are going to see, that you go that extra mile and try and find out how you can help, how you can not be a roadblock, be willing to jump through all of the hoops that you're asked to jump through, whilst delivering. It's a tightrope walk, but it absolutely can be done in my view. Sorry, Simeon. Now we'll go to the next slide.
To extend on that, please. I've had a number of conversations with people over the years of my time at ServiceNow, and something that keeps coming up is I see ServiceNow, I see the benefits in looking at a scoped application that meets our PII requirements, but we're on a journey of building and adding on to point solutions, and we've kind of committed to that for a period of time. What would your recommendation be to try to shorten that, cut that process of continually piecemeal things together, or try to build the case to move to a solution that they see that works with ServiceNow shorter or earlier in the time?
Yeah, I think it actually starts with an IT infrastructure discussion, to be honest, Karen. Like at the very end point of things, lots of businesses have lots of, quote, digital front doors. A lot of them have a SharePoint or an intranet site. A lot of them have different ways that they like to express, not express, but like to suck people in to try and find information, news, updates, and services. So you've kind of got to decide what the macro view of all of that looks like before you really make decisions around where ServiceNow would sit in the hierarchy of systems in the tech stack. Then the next step for me is actually trying to decide how you want to view your services. So Employee Center is kind of agnostic of discipline, right? It works across people, finance, it works across IT, obviously, But it's when you get a layer deeper, right? So I don't want to transact HR services in ITSM land for a myriad of reasons, including they have completely different SLA setups. They have different ways of viewing data and dashboards. Can it be Frankenstein? This is something that works. Yeah, lots of companies do it. I'm probably looking at having to undo some sins of the past in order to get ourselves away from that. But it doesn't need to be a black or white decision. What needs to occur is you need to think about the way that you want to view your business. So if you want to be able to look at a particular part of your business, say a shared services center or an IT platform or an HR outfit, you just need to ask yourself what you want to be able to take a look at. And that'll drive a bunch of decisions. So if you're a CPO, if you're a general manager of a business services or a finance services or people services area, you want to be able to look at when it's going well and when it's not. You want to be able to do things like root cause analysis to understand where it's broken, especially when the things that break end up in the news. And you want to, at a glance, be able to understand all of that. That massively drives the way that you decide to implement ServiceNow. It decides how you're going to configure your agent workspace. It decides how you're going to configure your catalog item. It's going to decide how you're going to configure certain aspects of the portal. And Simeon and I had to spend quite a lot of time deciding what the portal was going to look like based on a downward up approach, saying, how do we transact a ticket? I know I've just said we don't think of it in tickets, but we kind of do. How do we transact a ticket at the most basic level? And that'll actually just help you decide how you conceptualize the infrastructure discussion at the start. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful, Toby. A lot of
I've
people
included this.
Watching that back.
Yeah. I've included this slide. This is, very, very inside baseball in terms of, what we had to do across forms or catalog items, right? A lot of it won't mean too much to you guys. We delivered, a consolidation of 83 forms across people services, a consolidation of about 50 forms in finance services, depending on sort of where you look. This slide is more an encouragement to say, have a look at your prerequisites and have a look at the back of your house. It's the rubbish in, rubbish out analogy once again. But delivering a portal or delivering a services platform needs to take a look at what it is that you're trying to deliver in the first place. The reason that we ended up with 83 forms in people services, one of my ex-colleagues is here at the moment, is we picked up a SharePoint form and just created it in ServiceNow like for like. We picked up paper-based forms and did the exact same thing and thought nothing to categorization, thought nothing to efficiency. And ultimately we ended up in this place where I've been an HR guy for 15 plus years. I joined the organization and I couldn't find the form that I needed. And that shouldn't happen. So we've now got 9 forms that branch out into different areas, but ultimately they're governed by 9 categories. You shouldn't get confused. Finance services equally, like not only were they working across all sorts of different platforms and different types of forms that absolutely still included some paper-based forms that are faxed, predominantly in New Zealand. You got to take a look at that stuff and wrap it up into the program of work that you're looking at. Tempting to not, because it's time intensive, it's laborious, it's very frustrating to try and negotiate with people who have deeply held beliefs as to why their catalog works for them. And so then needs to be handled with a fair bit of finesse, a little bit of throwing things, and blood on the walls, etc. But it's necessary. I fundamentally believe that you cannot spend time trying to deliver a pretty front door unless your services are gorgeous in the background, and that is simplicity, and that is ease of use. Let's go again, Simeon. In a second, I'll show you a virtual agent that we have, but like I said, a real key for us at Downer is to try and exploit to the business's benefit that zero-tier kind of thinking. How can we make sure that we're self-serving? How can we make sure that we are giving people access to information that is not labor-intensive from a personnel perspective? Of course, it helps us try and understand how we can drive down, fundamental things like fixed cost in FTE, but it can also help us understand what it looks like to put the right resources in the right place. Your tiered services model, 9 times out of 10, ends up in some sort of organizational change, or at least team sort of placement, if you like, to make sure that there are people in tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 who have the space to exist in those roles. People that deal with high complexity issues can't be thinking about how to drive down their ticket volume when they're on the phone or doing an investigation that takes days, weeks, or months. So what we're trying to do is release people in the front end from having to wait for a ticket to be completed, wait for an email to be responded to, and try and deliver some self-serve in terms of just getting people's questions answered. I might take over here, Simeon. Is that all right?
Go for it.
Cool. So this is our portal. It's called our Data Portal. It's pretty imaginatively named, obviously. And we built it on the EC platform. We delivered it in October last year. I'm happy to say it was delivered quite well, even if I do say so myself. And ultimately, we sort of ended up at the place that we wanted to. Not going to give you a navigation tutorial on how to navigate our portal, because that would be silly. But ultimately, what we've done is make sure that services are top. We don't introduce the services page with copy or text. We don't even introduce it with a banner item here that you can click on to get more information. We've literally told the story that this is where you find services, and we put some frequently used services right there. It could be a timesheet, could be getting permissions for new software, general inquiries, IT, all of that kind of stuff. We think it looks pretty cool. It's on company brand in terms of color palette and all of that good stuff. And ultimately, it serves its purposes down to the ground. Across the top, as I mentioned, we've expanded services for IT, people services, finance. We have a manager hub. We have a big knowledge hub. We've added about 200 knowledge articles since August of last year that have really high click rates, have really high usage rates. And our first incarnation of our virtual agent, which goes live in the next week or two, really focus on directing traffic. So taking people to the right place, taking people to get information that's relevant to them, kind of like a upmarket traffic cop.
Toby, another question that we get asked frequently is, who writes your knowledge articles?
I'm very, very lucky, Karen. I've got a technical writer within the project whose position I've been now able to make permanent. His role is not only writing knowledge articles and the copy around them, but he's also going to manage the virtual agent after my project period has lapsed and I ride off into the sunset. It's resource. We do have in mind, and in the future, we have in mind ordaining, if you like, a few people that can become content contributors, especially given that you can create knowledge articles directly from the workspace rather than needing to sort of start with a blank page. So it then becomes a little bit experience driven. Then we can write knowledge articles for internal people functioning in HR, not just for the external market, if you like. But it's a resource. It's not an incredibly expensive one in terms of where the market sort of places value on those. It's a sacrifice. It's something that you absolutely need to consider in your resourcing discussions that you're having. Whether you do it short term like we did at the start to get ourselves up and running, given there are a lot of competing projects that needed knowledge. So James doesn't just write knowledge articles for HR, he writes knowledge articles for anything that we touch, including people services, finance services. He's done a fair bit of stuff for an HCM project, which you can see over there on the right, HR Core. You just got to invest.
A very busy person, I'm sure, but I'm very pleased to hear that he is across all of the units, because it limits the opportunity for confusion and kind of almost competing knowledge articles, because we know that there's more than one business unit involved in a lot of these. And of course, a well-written knowledge article is the key to deflecting cases and tickets not even being created in the first place.
Yeah, Yeah, and look, it's worth mentioning too, like knowledge articles in the ServiceNow platform, I believe you've got to go all in on it. So we've delivered knowledge articles on behalf of projects that are delivering software or projects that are delivering different kind of business processes. And these people have sometimes unilaterally spent a lot of time on a PowerPoint quick reference guide, which is very typical. And I've been the punk who's going in there saying, ServiceNow doesn't present things that well, like a big feature-rich, visually appealing knowledge article. And I've been met with resistance saying, well, we're not planning on using ServiceNow, but we absolutely have been given the autonomy and the authority to go in there and say, to access information on systems, on process, on policy documentation, the portal is it. Now, that means you've got to have buy-in by the people who really get to make those decisions. So I'm only ordained by them. I carry their authority with me as a project manager. But again, if you really want to sweat the asset, to my earlier point, especially when you've got things like AI-enabled search, especially when you've got things like the opportunity to go from the knowledge article directly into the form you need to use, directly into the application that you need to use, it's a perfect segue, honestly, Karen, to go into the virtual agent, because that's all we're trying to do there as well. To do it half-assed will get you a result. Like I said, I'm not a zealot for ServiceNow, but I've taken a few sips of the Kool-Aid. But I'm mostly taking the sips of the Kool-Aid based on the fact that it kind of works. We get more clicks than SharePoint does. That's because people are using it. I can't explain it any more detail than that. This is our virtual agent. We're in UAT at the moment. You can see that I've had some previous conversations before, and that we have a little bit of a disclaimer when you end a conversation, because we want to cover our asses, to be honest. But I thought I'd just quickly show you what it looks like. We're going live with a predetermined number of questions or responses based on subject matter that's come crowdsourced from P&C, people and culture, people services, payroll, all sorts of around the place. I think we're starting with about 120. Very soft launch, because it's not going to be smart upfront. Anybody who has built an AI tool knows that it's only as smart as the confines in which it understands. So a hypercare period when you deliver functionality like this isn't waiting for defects to come in or waiting for people to sort of complain about it. It's actually going to be monitoring the types of questions that we get in, trying to make sure that we link them to topics if they haven't been resolved, and even crowdsource more questions. So it's a little bit of a tightrope walk. I'm really interested to see how this goes. Fortunately, UAT started yesterday and it went extremely well. So it greets you. It says, hi, I'm the virtual agent. I'm new to the HR team. If you want to speak to a live agent for IT support, you can still do that. So we invite people to click IT if they want. But ultimately, it works like any other chatbot. I'm not going to show off this particular thing too much, because I think at the end of the day, everybody knows what a chatbot does. But the idea is that we have, this is one I prepared earlier. The idea is that we could take plain speak and turn it into that verified traffic cop, like I mentioned before. So in this particular instance, we've labeled our categories in HRSD because IT will come in and use the virtual agent in the same way. So that will help people delineate. The word requisition in IT means getting a laptop or a mobile phone, whereas obviously it's more recruitment based in an HR sphere. And if you click what it is that you want, it'll go searching, and there it is. Here's the topic. So all it's going to tell you is, firstly, we initiate this process as an HR call, which is an HCM tool that we use here at Downer. If you want to read about the process, you can click on the knowledge article. If you want to get started, click here, and it'll actually open that Oracle HCM Cloud application for you. You don't need to find a knowledge article or the knowledge article. You don't even need to use the AI-enabled search. You can literally just type in things here, and it will take you to where you want to be. If you want to be assisted with something else, like I said, you can even do things like single word searches, and it will give you a bunch of topics or categories to choose from. We're trying to build it for the lazy people, and I would absolutely identify myself in that particular category. So here you can see there are a bunch of different topics that you can go through. And absolutely, if you've got, you know, a question that you just don't know where to go. In a large company like Downer, it's pretty darn tough. So this particular thing, it's just, you can fill out a form if you've got absolutely something that quantifiably needs to be dealt with, or you can pick up the phone and speak to somebody. Nice and simple. You don't need to be a person that writes down a phone number or clicks somewhere else to do something. In fact, you can actually make a call using Teams directly from this page, and it'll take you to where you want to be. Equally, there are different ways that you can contact support. And once you're done, again, it'll give this incredibly important disclaimer that IR rammed it down my throat for good reason. And that's how a virtual agent works. In the context of a employee center portal, I think to steal your words from earlier, Karen, you're like, we are trying to be a one-stop shop. It's not necessarily then about the UI anymore. It's not necessarily about the beauty of the catalog items or anything else like that. Although, as I mentioned, it needs to be good and it needs to simplify services. But the more I can push into a virtual agent, having spoken to businesses of a similar size, some companies are fielding 300 plus on average per week queries via a virtual agent. And that's 300 queries that don't go to an email, a catalog item, or more crucially, a phone number. So from an efficiency standpoint and from the standpoint of just trying to help people and trying to give them up-to-date information that's accurate, and it will be accurate because of that technical writer that's now been made permanent, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It should work pretty well. I'll stop the share there. Do we need to put the slides back up, Simeon?
Yeah. If I could maybe just also add, I'll just share my screen again. Hey,
Yeah, we can see your slides again.
looking forward to phase 2 of virtual agent. If I could mention perhaps, Toby, great plans to add more complexity to the virtual agent. And so currently it's an information, I guess, provider as to, you know, knowledge articles, links to SharePoint and so on. But next phase, the plan is to also provide some service automation. So to actually replace the high volume tasks that agents would do. And for example, it might be, I need a pay slip for this pay period. And so the virtual agent would you know, have some prompts back and forth to the employee to determine what they're after. And then within the back end, we'll employ Flow Designer, which is ServiceNow's engine for building workflows and some smart logics, so integration. So we'll integrate with the payroll systems in the back end. That will then generate, you know, a document which then gets emailed to the employee, and so that all cuts out yeah, like literally hours and hours of agents doing this manual task. So yeah, so we're very excited to be partnering with these sorts of initiatives. So yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, Simeon, we've built one proof of concept. So it's not like will. I guess it is will, but it's also when. So it's not pie in the sky. We took a look at 30 high volume tasks that we complete in people services, and did a time and motion study on them. So we can demonstrably say exactly what kind of work effort we are removing as a result of automating these services. And it's fundamental. And what I mean by fundamental is it will fundamentally change the way that we look at our tiered services model. It should influence the way that we organize, whether that means putting people in the right places or whether that means opportunities to reduce a workforce. Of course, that's always something that we're looking at, because often these kinds of services can be quite labor intensive and expensive when you're part of a shared services function. But to Simeon's point, yeah, it's an information delivery system in its first incarnation. And once we have our technical writer in there churning that through, I'm going to leave him alone to do his job. And we'll circle back around with TMLabs and say, all right, how do we supercharge this thing and turn it into an automated service, which is frankly the more exciting stuff. I think we're at the end.
Wow, that went so fast. You've been extremely generous with the information that you've shared with us today, Toby, and thank you so much, Simeon and Reneel, for inviting me to take part in this with you today. And I think it's fair to say that we'll all be very keen to hear what the next phase looks like for you, Toby, and some of those metrics that come out of it. We all want to remove the manual, mundane tasks so that everyone can be focusing on work that motivates and inspires them to come to work every day. And with that, I think we're coming to an end, but we, as ServiceNow and TMLabs, do have a number of events that are coming up for the end of the year. At the end of July, we do have an innovation summit in Adelaide, where you can come along and listen to some of the presentations, or you can get hands-on in one of the labs that we're running. We have the same innovation summit in Perth on the 21st of August, and we'll also be attending ARI, which is coming up next month as well. So I would just like to thank you all for joining us today and look forward to seeing you again soon. And if you have any questions, Toby has very kindly offered his email address, and feel free to reach out to any of us. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.